The Big Ten and the SEC, well, they might be gaining a little bit of a reputation as the evil empire of college football, but a 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 college football playoff format, their college football playoff format, might make this sport even more epic than it ever has been before.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
I can totally understand people out there that look at this commentary, whether it's now, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes into this thing, whether it's all the way at the end of this thing. Certainly it says, well, Ted, you're talking from a position of privilege. You are talking from a position of power. I'm sure there might be some Big 12 fans. There might be some ACC fans that look at this and say this. And yes, I am talking about it certainly from the Big Ten perspective. But when you listen to me break down this thing a little bit, I actually might talk about things maybe more outside of the Big Ten and that perspective than inside of the Big Ten in that perspective. Both inside of the Power 2 and outside of the Power 2, I think that this format has tentacles. It has roots that I think could make college football more competitive and have more high-profile, high-stakes games, not only in the Big Ten and the SEC, but also in the Big 12, in the ACC, and throughout all of college football, certainly as well. This 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 college football playoff format that is being proposed by the Big Ten and the SEC, and a lot of information that I'm talking about today is referenced in Ross Dellinger's article that was dropped, I believe, on Sunday. I will link it in the description, certainly below. But this is a dramatic shift and a dramatic change in how college football seasons are going to be played, how college football seasons are going to be approached by teams, coaches, and players, certainly going forward. But if there's one thing that's true about this summer, there will be dramatic change. And it's not just the college football playoff. We all know the House versus NCAA, the salary structure, the NIL structure that is going to go over this sport is going to be one of the major talking points that happens this summer. We are going to go maybe to a point of no return this summer, because when we come out of that and we're playing football in September, this thing is going to look a whole lot different. And the college football playoff and what's going to happen this summer, and as we look forward to some change, and there will be change in 2026, we're going to be taking on an entirely new college football playoff. But they say the only constant is change, and I am here to evolve. I am not here to complain. Now, when I first really got a look at this college football playoff format, when we first really heard about it, I think that was last summer. The Big Ten was a big part in really proposing it. I said, wait, 4 bids for the SEC and the Big Ten, 2 bids for the Big 12 and the ACC. This is going to be written in stone? This is going to be public. I thought having bids for those conferences over the other conferences and having that universally be known was a little bit odd. I will certainly say that. But when I really started to dive into it a little bit more, and the way college football is shifting and the structure and the alignment of college football is right now, it makes a lot of sense. Here's a graphic that was posted by Ross Dellinger on Twitter that really highlights this. When you look at the current alignments of the Big Ten and the SEC versus the Big 12 and the ACC, it makes sense why the Big Ten and SEC would receive 4 automatic qualifiers and the Big 12 and the ACC would receive 2 automatic qualifiers. In the college football playoff era, since 2014, the Big Ten and the SEC have equaled 63% of the teams in the top 14 at the end of the year, and 65% in the top 16, if you want to take it that much further. How do the Big 12 and the ACC stack up, you may ask? In a 16-team format, the top 16, 29% of those teams come from the Big 12 of the ACC. 41% come in the top 14 from those two respective conferences. Major conference consolidation has led us down this road to an uneven balance between automatic qualifiers in the college football playoff. When you bring all of the best teams and when you bring all of the best programs and brands into two conferences, it makes those conferences that much more difficult. And folks, things are not created equal, which leads me into my next series of points why this is the right format and a potentially epic format for college football, certainly going forward. The playing field in college football has never been level. It never was level. It's never going to be level, especially now. It is more lopsided than it has ever been in the history of this great sport. In theory, NFL schedules are fairly balanced. Now, I know some schedules are more difficult than others, but there is a certain amount of equity across the 32 teams in the National Football League. You can't compare a Big Ten schedule. You can't compare a USC schedule to that of a Kansas schedule. They are two very different Goliaths. They are two very different slates. They are being judged on two very different scales. So there are different scales as it pertains to how many of these teams are going to be rewarded by being in the postseason when all of this thing is said and done. I think one of the things that we continue to fight within college football is a certain amount of bias. It's not something they really fight too much, maybe referees. We'll leave that alone for now, but it's not something they fight too much in the National Football League. It's certainly not the same type of bias that maybe exists within the college football playoff. I think this particular formula, this particular format where it's more based on conference standings, allows for the elimination of some of that bias. And it eliminates the College Football Playoff Committee subjectivity. Now, I will say this about the College Football Playoff Committee. This year, I thought they did everything that they were supposed to do. Maybe the rankings leading up through the month of November skewed maybe some of the rankings and how they ended up when the College Football Playoff bracket was actually released. But maybe that's a different story, certainly for another time. What would I like to see happen if we indeed do rely on conference standings throughout all of this? The playoff needs to be seeded. You have a certain amount of teams from these conferences getting into the college football playoff, but how are they seeded? College hockey, I covered college hockey for a long time. I really started my career, covering college hockey. They have a pairwise system. They have this computer generated, you kind of bring everything into an algorithm and it spits out a top 16, and that's how they seed their NCAA tournament. Hey, let's combine the AP poll. Yes, we know there's problems with the AP poll. Let's combine the coaches poll. Hey, let's throw in the BCS computers. Remember the old Harris poll? Let's throw them all in, put it into a recipe, let's bake it up in the oven, and let's see what the aggregate spits out. Now, we can certainly have some polls maybe weighted a little bit higher than others. There's a certain way that you can figure out the formula to be able to spit out as unbiased of a rankings as you possibly can when the bracket needs to be seated at the appropriate time, certainly as well. This format, because of its nature in conference races, is going to create more high-stakes games at the end of the season. Now, when I look at everything surrounding this potential playoff format, and you can talk about this and you can talk about that, but for me, for someone that loves watching football, I love watching high-stakes college football. This format allows that to happen. When you are fighting to get into a conference play-in spot, when you are fighting to have a home game in a conference play-in spot. Michigan and Minnesota, for example, would have just been one game out from making a Big Ten play-in spot. Now, you can raise your hand and say, Michigan went 7-5. Minnesota wasn't exactly the example you look for a team that is a national championship playoff worthy caliber football team. All due respect to the Minnesota Golden Gophers, you certainly had a good year this past year as well. Will teams like a Michigan or a Minnesota or what would have been the number 6 seed in the Iowa Hawkeyes, will they get their face smashed in a lot of the time? Yeah, absolutely. Look at the first round of the NFL playoffs. There's usually not a lot of great there's not a lot of great NFL football on that particular weekend. I view the NFL a lot like I view college football. Like when you looked at the National Football League towards the end of the season, I think a lot like college football, there are a handful of teams that can win the Super Bowl every single year. I am not an NFL expert, so if I egregiously leave somebody out, please let me know in the comments below. But the Chiefs, the Eagles, even though the Lions lost early, they were a really good football team. The Ravens you could throw in there. The Bills you could throw in there. Maybe you could throw Washington. Like that's 5 or 6 teams right there that you felt. I don't know if you could have said that Washington could have won the Super Bowl, right? So maybe you're getting down to like 4 or 5 teams that you felt were championship caliber football teams. And I think that's what a lot of people in college football really focus on. They focus on, well, all of these teams can't win a championship. Yeah, we know that. It's about the journey. It's about the chase. It's about the opportunity. And yes, we also know it's about the money that's certainly involved as well. But more fan bases are going to be more engaged at the end of the season with more high profile and high stakes games at the end of the year. And man, this format is going to get the Big Ten and the SEC on as even of a playing field as we can get them, because it will get the SEC to finally play that 9th conference game. It will have the SEC eliminate a November powder puff game. Maybe they'll structure their schedules in a different way where they still will play the Citadels of the world late in the season. But in theory, it will eliminate that November powder puff game. And we will also see Big Ten versus SEC Goliath matchups in the month of September. I don't know about you, man. I want to see great football games. Whether it's at the beginning of the season in a Big Ten and SEC crossover, whether it's high stakes in conference matchups, I want to see more playoff caliber, meaningful football games at the end of the college football season. That's what I want. You might want something different, but that's really what I care about more right now. And having more of those postseason games on campus in front of these campus crowds is going to be absolutely epic. And that really leads into what my thoughts are and how I would structure this thing. I want to start first on the conference play-in structure because that's the thing that I get most excited about. Yes, the national tournament would be certainly great to watch. It would certainly be fun to watch. But I think conference championship weekend, considering, with an expanded playoff and everything that's kind of going on in college football, I think it's losing some of its luster. And I think this playoff format would make conference championship and conference play-in weekend one of the very best weekends on the college football calendar. Let's start first with the Big Ten and the SEC. Number 3 versus number 6, and number 4 versus number 5. And the high seeds, the 3 and 4 ranked teams in the Big Ten and SEC, would host games on campus. Now, I think the revenue that's at stake, and of course that's a very big part of this for Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, I think the revenue will keep the Big Ten championship games alive, and it will keep the SEC championship games alive. And I think they want to keep their meaning as high as they possibly can as for their television partners. So I tend to favor a 14-team college football playoff field within this format so you can have those two byes. So the winner of the Big Ten championship game and the winner of the SEC championship game are going to get those byes certainly as well. So the winner, hey, you get to call yourself conference champions, and you get that bye into the quarterfinals of the college football playoff as well. And how great is this for Tony Petitti? How great is this for the television package that exists within the Big Ten? A conference championship game and 2 play-in games, Fox, CBS, NBC. It fits perfectly, I think, into the way the Big Ten would certainly want to lay that thing out. For the SEC and the Big 12, number 1 versus number 4, number 2 versus number 3 to guarantee their 2 spots. I think a really good way to avoid these long stretches of byes for teams that really earned a great spot and a great draw in the college football playoff is an idea that Joel Klatt had on his podcast, and that's to move the Army-Navy game, which has been reserved for its own weekend following Conference Championship Saturday, is moving the Army-Navy game to week 0. I think so many things can be accomplished by doing that. Freeing up some flexibility with the college football playoff calendar certainly helps as well. But then Army-Navy becomes, as Joel mentioned, a national anthem to this season. I think that would be quite the spectacle to be able to have that to kick off the college football season. I think that would be really fun. I think that would really be exciting. Now, one other thing I would do is I would backload the second byes for every team in college football into the month of November. So when you get into the playoff like I'm about to get into, you're not playing 8, 9, 10, something like that, consecutive football games. So you want that break later on in the season so you're not playing that many games. So after the regular season, you go into those conference play-in and title games that I mentioned before. That is in the first week of December. The very next week, there's no break here like there is now because we've moved Army-Navy over to week 0. The round of 14 or 16 played in the second week of December on campus. The quarterfinals the very next week in the third weekend of December. You guessed it, that is on campus. The semifinals are on College Football's Day, New Year's Day, and the Rose Bowl game in Pasadena is a permanent semifinal football game. I would rotate the other semifinal game with the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and the Cotton Bowl as well. And the national championship game would then be a week plus after New Year's Day, certainly as well. I think this format would bring in so many intriguing changes to college football in so many different ways. More meaningful, impactful college football games. As a fan, I don't think anybody would want to turn that down. I know this is a little bit of a controversial topic, and a lot of people have very different opinions. I want to hear your opinions in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.